Hi everyone, my name is Pavan. And if you've seen my previous videos, you would by now know that I'm trying to record some videos which I think could be asked, for questions which I think could be asked during Frontend interviews. So for the video today, I'm going to stick with React. Uh, and I'm going to cover a question which I think is difficult, especially with the time frame, which is 35 minutes to 45 minutes. But let's go ahead and try solving this and see how we can go about doing this. Especially if you have not tried solving this before, I think it's going to take some effort for someone to come up with a solution within the time frame. But what they look for is your approach and not the end-to-end solution. But I'm hoping that with such videos, you might have some kind of insights on how you would be able to tackle this, and if you're prepared for it, and if you have seen this kind of question before, it becomes easier to do that during the interview. So cool. So what this question is, it's called grid lights. The idea is that you're going to implement a function which will go and create this grid lights, which is 9 tiles with the center tile not having any border or color. But then when you click on each of these tiles, it's going to change the color to green. And once you're done clicking all of them, it's going to immediately start undoing the tiles in the order it was clicked for every 300 milliseconds of interval. So let's say I clicked on 1, then I clicked on 3, and I clicked on 2. It's going to undo 3 first. It's going to undo 2 first, and then 3, and then 1. So it's going to do the reverse undo, and it's going to do that with 300 milliseconds for every single reversion before it reverts everything, and the user can click again and re-execute the deactivation once all the tiles are clicked. I hope that is clear. So let's go about implementing this code. So now let's start with first implementing board in React. So board is the component. Now what board is doing is it is returning, it's creating a div. And let's give this a class name called grid. And then it's going to create buttons inside it. And let's give that class name as tile, right? So let's also start adding the styling. So we created a board, which is what we created. We called it a grid. Let's call it a board, right? And we are going to use grid in this case. And we are going to use grid template columns and give it 33.3%. The reason is because we have 3 columns, each of them occupying equal amount of width. Now, if somebody would ask you during this interview and say, why are you doing this inline? You can always say that I could do that with the JS by adding inline class names or styling from the JS using your app code. If you want the implementation to be flexible, but since the question was very specific over here, where we were asked to create only a 3x3, I decided to do this with CSS rather than doing it with the JS. And let's give it even a gap of 20 px. This is just so that we are able to create this separation over here. And let's have the tile assign and height to it. Let's use 200 px for now. Let's go back to the app. Now, what we are going to do is, in my component over here, we are going to start calling this component that we created. So let's have this div, but let's also call the board component that we just created on the top. And as you can see, it's already started working where we have 1 tile created. Now, how do we go about creating all the other tiles? So let's first think of a structure. So let's create, let's call it cells, right? And what we have 1, 1, which is the top. We have 1, 0, 1, which is the second row. And then again, we have 1, 1, 1. You can imagine this is how your tiles look like, right? Because we have 1, 1, 1, 1, 0, 1, and 1, 1, 1. And let's flatten this into a flat structure. We just wanted this as a reference for us. So what we are going to do is we are going to pass cells to it, and the cells is going to be the one that we maintained on created over here at the top. So as you can see, this is going to now become a single flat structure array. And we are going to now iterate through it with props.cells.map, which is tile. And let's also have the index over here. And let's create the button inside it, which is what we will do here. So now this should start, this has already created 9 buttons for us, and it's all having a tile structure. Let's do this 150px instead of 200, because I think 200 is just too much. I'll also decrease this. Okay, now let's go back to the app. So now what do we do next after this? So now we want to ensure that the center tile has got no background color attached to it, right? So the way we can do that is, if you see the value within the array is how we can identify if a tile is active or non-active. So over here, we can give it a very specific class name. Let's use ES6 template strings. We are not importing any class names function, which tells us that if the tile is true, let's add a class called active, but let's add an empty white space at the beginning. And let's go back to the CSS. By default, let's have the tile background as transparent, and let's have a border which is none. But if the tile is active, we are going to have a border which is 1px solid black. Cool. So now it's given you the tiles, and as you can see, the center one has got no styling attached to it. So that gave you the basic function, basic styling over here of the tile. Now let's go into the next part, which is when you click on the tiles, you are going to go and change the color to green. Now to do that, you need to know what were the tiles clicked, and you also need to know the order of it. So now we need to start introducing the concept of state. So let's use state from React. Okay. And what we are going to do over here is that we are going to have a state called order, and we will assign an empty order to it. Why are we creating the order over here? So the order is going to be the order of indexes of the tiles that were clicked. So if I would have clicked on the 0 tile, I would insert into my array 0. If I clicked on the second tile, I would insert into my order 2. So the order is going to maintain all the indexes of the clicks in the order of the click, right? So now what we're going to do over here is that we are going to listen to the on click of the button. So on click, and let's call a function over here called tile click, and let's define that function, right? So tile click, which has got an event passed to it. Let's first prevent the default behavior of button, and we are going to now call props dot tile click, and over here, and this is going to be a function that is going to be passed as a prop to the component. We will go about implementing this too. But one thing important over here is that what we need is the index. So how do we pass the index, which is over here, to the function over here, which is when we start using the concepts of closure. So we will create a function which returns a function, and it takes an input parameter. And all we need to do is pass an index. So index is a function. This is a parent function, which is going to have a closure of the index, followed by a function which it is returning, which is what the event listener is going to trigger as part of the callback, right? And we are going to pass the index over here to it. So now let's go and define even the tile click over here. So what we are going to do is take the index. The idea over here now is going to push this new index into the array. And since we are using a state, so let's create a new order by slicing the current order. We are going to push the index into it. Okay, and we are going to set the order as index, the new order. So now every time whenever you're clicking, you're ensuring that you are clicking on the tile and you're pushing the index into the array. Now, how do we find out what was clicked? So we are going to pass now the order back to the board, right? Now, what is going to happen over here is that we want to check if the index was clicked or not. So tile clicked, is tile clicked. The way we can do this is by taking props.order, and we want to check if this index exists in the array. So it's not equals to -1. You can optimize this, but since we have only 9 tiles, I personally feel the complexity is not going to be really high, and I prefer using index of. But if you want, you can make this a set, a map, and reduce the complexity lookup by changing it from O of n to O of 1. But for the sake of simplification, I'm sticking to a simple array in this case. Now, if the tile is clicked, we're again going to do the same concept as we did before, which is use ES template strings. And let's add a class name called filled, right? And let's go over here to the CSS tile.filled, and we are going to have a background color to it, which is going to be green. So let's go back over here. Let's try testing if it started working. And based on the code, now things have started working, but there are some issues over here. I'm able to click that center tile. Now, that's not what we expect from the code, right? We are not supposed to be clicking the center tile. So how can we go about ensuring that we don't let the center tile be clicked, which is when we will disable the button in such cases. And how do we disable the button? So we would disable the button if the tile has got a false value or 0, right? So because we are using this as the structure, so if a tile has got a 0 value, we would make the button disabled. So now let's go test it out again. Am I able to click the center? No longer. I'm not able to click the center. Similarly, we also want to disable the button if the button is already clicked. So let's have add an or condition, and also ensure that the same tile which is clicked cannot be clicked again. And we can do that by just disabling it using the style clicked, right? So this now, with this, we have implemented at least half of the functions. But now what we have to implement is deactivating the tiles. And for that, we are going to start using more hooks. So we're going to use 2 more hooks, which is use effect and use ref. So if you're, familiarize yourself with all these hooks. It will be important if somebody is going to ask about it during the interview or ask you to use it during the interview. So we are going to use effect over here. Now, use effect takes 2 parameters. First is the callback, and the second is an array. If you don't supply anything to it, it just implies it's going to trigger this use effect on mount, and every time state changes. If you give it an empty array, it means that it's going to implement this function only once, which is on mount. But if you want it to implement for every value change, we can add that into the array. So in this case, we can now pass order to the array. What React does internally is it uses object.define property, and it uses the getter and setter of it, and then it executes the function whenever a setter is called, where the value of it is being mutated. That could also be an interview question for you on implementing a getter and setter for a variable using object.define property. Cool. So now what are we going to do over here? We are going to see if the order.length is equal to your cells dot length minus 1, which is when the user has clicked all the tiles and has reached the end, which is when this if block is going to get executed, and let's call a function called deactivate. Right? Now let's start implementing this deactivate function. So what deactivate is going to do is that it's going to set an interval where it's going to try interval for every 200 millisecond, which was what the question was about, of trying to deactivate every 200 millisecond. And it's going to pop from the array the last value of it. So, and then reassign the new array by popping the last value as part of as the set order value. So let's now implement it. But before that, we have to even um, create a use ref, which is interval instance, and we will assign it a new null value. The idea of using a use ref is because you want this interval instance to exist with its value during all the React renders. Ref as a value is retained across all the renders, which is why you use that for keeping a track of a DOM node or assigning set timeout or set interval, so that you're able to take the interval instance and clear it at a later stage whenever you want to do it. So let's now do an dot current. That's an important thing, that if you're using useref, you need to use the dot current value of it to assign anything to it. You cannot assign it to the direct value. And now let's set an interval. And the interval is going to be for 200 millisecond, which was the ask of the question. Now, what we are going to do over here is we are going to use the set order. The only difference is I'm going to use the callback function of the setter of React to set the set order, not just assign it. I get some advantage of this because we can assign some business logic, and we can also get the previous order value using the set order. Now, if the previous, okay, so now what do we do over here? Let's actually do a new order similar to what we did on the top, which is previous order dot slice, right? And we are going to pop from it the last value, and we are going to return now the new order, which means that my set order is going to take the new value every time popping a value from it. So let's try this out and see what happens. So you can see that it undid everything, but there are now a lot of bugs where the interval instance is still running, and it's trying to clear stuff, which we don't want in this case. So what do we do to clear the interval instance? So we just check if the previous order length is equal to 0, which is when everything from the array has been removed. Let's return. And we are going to call clear interval and pass it the interval instance. And now what will happen with this is that the bug that we had previously, where we were trying to stop the interval which was running, has got stopped, but there's a bug over here. And I'll explain this bug. I've done this many times. So when you're returning over here, remember that you cannot return an undefined value. If you return an undefined, your order is going to get set to undefined, and any of your code which exists it to be a different data structure will break, which is why over here we will return the previous order, which was missing previously, and now re-execute this code, and you will see that everything starts working. But now there's a bug that when the transitions are happening, I'm able to click on a tile and activate it back. Now, as part of the interview, there would be one more requirement that it's important that you ask this during the requirement on what happens when somebody clicks on the tile when the tiles are being transitioned. Most likely the answer you would get is that you should not allow any clicks during the phase of transition. And to do that, we can actually create one more state called is animating. That is animating. You can give it any name. I'm using a name called is animating, and let's assign the value as false. What we are going to do is, as soon as the deactivation starts, let's set the animating as true, right? And we are going to set it as false once all the tiles have finished. And we are going to use that to deactivate the tile that does not allow any click. So we are going to create a prop over here called disabled, and let's use the is animating as the value to it. And similar to how we did not tile or is tile clicked, we are also going to do or props deactivated, or sorry, props disabled. So now what is going to happen is that button is going to be disabled when the deactivate value or the disabled value over here is true. So let's click on it. And now you can see that I'm not able to click on any of the tiles till the animation has finished. And then I can click on it once the animation completes. Cool. With this, I think we are done with this question. I'll just go over it again. So we created a board, we used display grid, and we created buttons. To create the buttons or the tiles, we created a structure over here called cells. We flattened it into a single level versus m into n, which was what we use for our clarity, but not the way we want as part of data structure. And then we passed it to the board, used that to create the tile. We added an active class, which was based on the value of it. So if it's 0, we don't add it. If it's not 0, we add an active class, use that to assign the border. We added the click events for the button. And then we used closure to maintain the index, and then call this props function for the app. It's important to understand where you maintain state, because whenever you're having a state, remember any mutation to state is going to result in React re-rendering everything inside it. So be very clear with your answers when you're defining your state. Where do you define it, at the app level or the component level? In this case, I've defined at the app level. You could always create a new component of yours called board and have the state inside it instead of having it at the app, because you don't want React to re-render everything whenever the order is changing. It should probably only render the board and not the whole of the app, right? And then what we did is we used the use effect, and we used the array to define when and how the use effect should be called. Check the length of the order, which is what we are maintaining as a state for the index, for storing the indexes that were of the tiles that were clicked in the order of the click. And once we have all of them clicked, we are going to call the deactivate. The deactivate is going to set an interval for every 200 millisecond, and it's going to go and pop from the array the last value and reassign it with the new array, by which is going to have one item reduced from it as part of the set order. And we are going to check that if we are at a stage where everything from the array was removed, we are going to clear the interval, and we are going to maintain another state called as animating to ensure that we don't allow any clicks on the tile from the start of the animation till the end of the animation, where we are trying to undo all the actions that the user had taken. Cool, folks. So I'll keep recording more videos, but this is for the grid lights. If you have any questions, feel free to add that as a comment within this video.